So, I am the program manager for Greening the Public Realm at Islington Council, and WSP, Millie Morgado from WSP, is the lead consultant on our research program. So, the NERF Green Finance for Islington Pocket Park Framework, what is that? What does it mean? So, the NERF is the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, and that is a funding grant process through both DEFRA and Natural England, and it's administered through the Environment Agency. So we will find out more about this. So I joined Islington back in October 21, and what was interesting is I had a very small budget and I had the title of Greening the Public Realm. So what I discovered very early on is that I had strong ideas, and one of the strong ideas was about creating a community-led greening proposals program for the borough. And the reason why I started here, it was very much from the revenue and maintenance perspective. Throughout my whole career, one of the main blocks in local authorities has been, yeah, it's a great idea, but we haven't got the budget and we haven't got the maintenance to go with it. So what I really wanted to do first of all was crack that nut in enabling alternative solutions to delivering greening on the highway, but with communities. So the aim would be to empower communities and provide new opportunities for food growing, but also take off some of the burden of the local authority in terms of the maintaining. So really trying to switch the narrative there. So when I came in, I created a test and learn program called Islington Greening Together. So that's now in its second year, which is great. And the slide to the right there gives some examples of the interventions that have been delivered on the highway. So my next kind of idea, if you like, was I met a local councillor and on site, and he had an idea to put raised planters at the end of a dead end to slow down mopeds. And I thought, okay, I can get behind that. It might not be the most radical idea, but it's greening, and it's a sort of nod to the future uses of these types of dead ends. And then he said, well, actually there's 5 dead ends in this area, and I would like this to be rolled across all of them. But then what I saw was the opportunity to deliver pocket parks. So that would include sustainable urban drainage, possibly urban orchards, raised planters for food growing, incidental play features, pollinators, places to rest, possibly linked to active travel routes, green corridors, and the multiple benefits went on and on and on. In terms of shading, reducing local green deficits, etc. And I said to the councillor, what I see is this potential to be rolled out across the whole council. And he said, yeah, that's never going to happen because we don't have the budget. But I thought to myself, okay, well, I think there's something here, and that's when I came across the NERF funding. So that was all about the marrying up of delivering and creating a pipeline of projects at scale and looking at new green finance mechanisms to deliver them. So I looked across the whole of the borough and I identified approximately 1,000 dead end sites. So assuming that 30% are more convertible, that's 300 pocket parks potentially just in those little areas alone. And then it was about, well, out of those, which ones will actually have impact around flood risk, reducing local green deficit, perhaps marrying into the programs that I've already introduced. So we're really capturing the community-led aspects with the environmental and social benefits. And again, what would it look like if we were to scale up across the whole of London? So we were looking at approximately 10,000 pocket parks. Now, this proof of concept has started life as the dead end. And the reason why I chose the dead end is because it is not in conflict with development. We're not having to divert traffic. It's the easy end of the scale, because whatever purpose or whatever function those dead ends have, generally, not always, that function, whether it be turning, can be shifted further down, and the dead end itself can be reimagined and repurposed. So, but it's not just the dead end that this can be applied to. It can actually also be applied to interventions, green infrastructure at a broader scale. For example, livable neighbourhoods, where we're looking at neighbourhood-wide green infrastructure interventions. Or it could be applied to a whole street in terms of the repurposing of a whole street, all sorts of different things. It doesn't have to be a pocket park at the end of the actual street, because all the principles can also be applied. So our research focused primarily on three pillars. The first one is defining ecosystem services. Second one, the streamlining of the landscape process, resource, and the governance. And the third pillar, focusing on the green finance drivers. So the idea that as we move through our research and development program, by this point, we have created a readily investable pipeline of projects. So what are we talking about? Building ecosystem benefits from pocket parks. So what we're really looking at is collecting all of the benefits that we've described, social, environmental, and economic benefits. So for example, when we talk about well-being, we could talk about the sort of connection with nature, being present to it, the uplifting sort of well-being aspects, the social elements, and really starting to identify what those opportunities are. So it could be cooling from the trees, it could be new opportunities for food growing, and it's tangible. So really making sure that what we're offering here is measurable and tangible. So one of the tools that has recently come into play is the urban greening factor. And primarily what we're looking to do is repurpose the highway, which is starting with a grey surface. So in terms of applying urban greening factor, we can really identify the uplift, and quite a dramatic uplift in that sort of using that tool. So for a potential investor, funder, etc., it becomes very tangible what the difference is. It's also very attainable because there's multiple sites, and we can, there's a lot of opportunity to implement them. And they are impactful because, as we've noticed, depending on where the location is, or it could be near a school street, or it could really start to become like a sort of meanwhile space for new economic opportunities. So it really has potential to be impactful. And as well, having communities at the heart of this, always maintained. So these sites really need to be married into the process, and in terms of the co-design and the engagement process. So the other element is, really looking at streamlining of those processes. That could be internal processes and internal governance and blockages, and how we unblock those. And it can also be about the actual process itself, and how we quickly decipher the impact of these sites. Millie's going to be going through this particular slide selection in more details. And the third pillar, this, who's going to invest into this. So the bottom of the dial has been sort of existing capital opportunities. Section 106 and SIL funding could be existing grant opportunities. And so we've looked at the sort of opportunities that we currently have, look at how we can take our pipeline of projects and sort of wire those into existing opportunities, but also start to turn up the dial into new ones. So we're looking at the local bids, the business improvement districts, and also in terms of philanthropy and ESG. There are new drivers coming in, such as the UK Green Taxonomy, which will have tax incentives going forward. So we're really starting to look at how we can develop develop out and build out the pipeline to meet the new conditions going forward. In terms of our approach for early adopters and of our program, we had a local bid, the Central District Alliance, and they undertook a temporary intervention in the Clerkenwell area. This looks like a meanwhile site, and it is, and it was an opportunity to test out a site here to see how the community can engage with it. Is this something they would want to invest in? And this meanwhile approach is a really good tool to actually test and learn what these sites could potentially do going forward. And a key aspect going forward is the maintenance and stewardship model. So again, whereas in the previous program, I had looked at individual community members maintaining it, what we're looking at for this particular model is more of a neighborhood-wide program. So it'd be anchored into existing institutions such as the community centres or the libraries or the local trade association to actually help support and maintain a community-led model. So we can go through that in more detail, but for now, I'm going to pass you over to Millie. Thank you. Hello?
Hi, I'm just sharing my screen.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just coming out of this one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me just put it into presentation mode. Okay, so Charlotte has given you an introduction to our program, and I'll go through the key outputs and findings, key recommendations, and then we'll get Charlotte back to do conclusions. So in terms of key outputs and findings, we're going to be covering 3 key tools, urban greening tools that we have developed as part of our Green Finance for Islington Pocket Park framework, which is the name of our NERV program. So the first is the Pocket Park Design Methodology Framework. And as you can see on the diagram on the left, is a series of components that we have developed to basically do a landscape-led approach, which is a combination of people, place, and nature, and balancing these 3 elements. And it starts with the kind of enabling conditions of the design framework, which is a combination of having the funding, the donors, the investors, the community aspects, as well as the management and the maintenance, which is what Charlotte was describing with the stewardship model. So we define off-takers as those involved in the design of the pocket park, and it includes, as I mentioned, donors, investors, communities, and a range of organizations, including philanthropy and ESG investors. And then the stewardship model is basically the governance, is the maintenance, which in our case is going to be local authority-led, but obviously would include also the combination of the community that's going to be using the park, that's also going to be taking care of the park. So those are the 2 elements of the first square at the top, which is off-takers and stewardship. Then we go into the special design typologies, which I'm going to describe next, and then design components, and then all of these together will give you a pocket park that has been designed following our landscape-led methodology. So in terms of the elements of the spatial design typologies, we start with a nature-people balance, and that is the first rectangle at the top. So it's a balance between nature and people. So you start with 100% nature, 0% people, which is the first to the left. And then we go all the way to 20% nature, 80% people, for example, for the far right. And then in the middle, you have 80% nature, 20% people, and then 50% nature and 50% people. And this is sort of to give you an example of kind of the different aspects that we can cover in that balance. So it's basically to balance the social and nature benefits that we can get from the pocket parks. And it's all going to be done through community discussions to kind of understand the needs. So the needs are going to basically help us realize that balance between nature and people. So the middle, the middle square is basically giving you the range of typologies that basically illustrate that combination or balance of nature and people. So we can go from the first, which is a microforest, the first at the top left is 100% maximized tree planting, and it can go all the way to the bottom right where we have urban playground, which is 20% urban, and then 80% play for all. And then obviously this all has to sit within the context consideration. So the context of the site, the context of what people want to get from this. So each design of each pocket park is obviously going to have to consider the contextual opportunities and constraints of those potential locations. For example, any kind of physical arrangements of the area will also play into the factors of what we can do through design. So the context considerations that we have in our design framework, which you can see in the bottom of the squares, is 100% depaving, which is basically removing all the tarmac or asphalt, 100% raised, which is basically just putting things on top, and then a combination of no depaving and no pave, which is to remove that, and then raise and pave, which is another opportunity for transforming the site. So this is basically the elements of the design and based on the interventions that we could do. The combination of that model cannot translate graphically into what you have here, which is having all of these design components would let us to benefit. And on the right side, you can see how we could present that in almost like a fact sheet of all of our typologies, which we have created, which is that middle square where we have the combination of nature and people. So to give you an example of what those typologies look like and what we have done in terms of combining the design framework and the nature and balance and nature and people balance, we have two examples here. So on the left, we have the spontaneous play, which is 80% nature provision, 20% people. And it's a combination of community needs that could be, for example, the need for a tree canopy, accessible green areas with suds, informal play elements as well, and 100% depaving, which is basically to remove all of the asphalt. That is an urban green factor about 0.65. Currently, 0.40 is the target for residential developments in London and as well in Islington. And that is one example of what we could do. And then you have the microforest, which is the one on the right. And that is 100% nature because it's basically 100% dense microforest planting. That is an example of also what you can do. And then in terms of our urban greening factor score, it's about 1. So obviously it's taking you all the way because it's basically transforming something that's completely paved into something that now it's completely rewild. And obviously the benefits are various and far ranging, but we're looking at these kind of examples. Obviously there is tons of combinations of what you can do in terms of design of a pocket park and the balance of nature and people. In terms of the site potential, I'll go with this approach of collecting data sets are publicly available information that is accessible to anyone. So we combine basically different geographical information systems, data sets that could help us connect with the work that Charlotte had already done with mapping the location of pocket parks across Islington. And then together with those data sets, we sort of went into identifying geographical conditions, community interest, and social environmental conditions that we could capture through a scoring that we could use to basically identify the locations where we have the highest chances of making a difference. Now, that is also combined with a site audit. So as you can see, the score that I was mentioning before is sort of captured in the two bottom squares or rectangles where we can see the score. So the score will go from 1 to 3, 1 being the lowest score, which means that there is the highest chance of opportunity to make a difference. And the 3 is just simply that that particular score is not necessarily an issue for that particular location. And that will give you an average total score of 1 to 3. So it combines with a pocket park site potential, which is a first audit of what is there, what is the potential, and it's all done through a Google Maps approach in which we can have a look at the location and available photos where we can see what is already there. So you can see that we can capture site information and then different aspects of community participation as well, and then potential ecosystem benefits that can come from the potential interventions, as well as an investment opportunity, which is the potential cost associated with that pocket park, and about a 30-year maintenance cost related to that particular pocket park and a potential design. So altogether, this is a kind of like a fact sheet that has been developed as part of a site audit of 1,000 sites that Charlotte had already identified. And from that assessment, she identified 300 sites that could potentially give us that greatest chances of developing into pocket parks and developing into a full design and therefore providing benefits to communities in Islington. So we mentioned the work pipeline before, and we just wanted to give a bit of a summary of what a pocket park pipeline looks like. And essentially, it's a portfolio of visible border-wide sites spanning across all of the wards in Islington. And this has been identified through different means, including the work that Charlotte has been doing through Islington Greener Together. Each site obviously has to be designed, measured, and monitored in accordance with key social and environmental economic outcomes. So as we explained, we would be applying that design framework that we have developed as part of our NERV project. And obviously not all the sites will have the same outcome. So as we mentioned before, we're running a site audit, and that will inform the design aspects that we would do and the interventions, and therefore the benefits will be different. For example, if we have one that's more looking into developing subs, then obviously we'll be reducing flood risk. But if there is another one that is not necessarily taking care of those aspects, and we might have, for example, more food growing, and that would be more of a community approach to it, and pollinators, for example. They all address inequality nonetheless. So I think there is a huge advantage through pocket parks to address social inequality, as they provide green spaces where there isn't much green space. They also provide the opportunity for property uplift, which would be improving the value of the homes that are nearby, and obviously well-being and health benefits, such as reducing and improving air quality and reducing heat island effect, which is obviously going to improve with quality of temperatures and resilience. And this is obviously going to be looking into a stewardship model to take care of all of these pocket parks. And lastly, it's the continuation of the monitoring even after the pocket park has been built for at least 30 years. And that is linked to BNG, because there is a condition that it has to be monitored over 30 years where possible. So in terms of the findings of our NERV project, so NERV is all about mobilizing finance, and therefore our findings are kind of more looking into those aspects. So the third pillar of our framework. Therefore, the first is that we found that there is a lot of appetite for pocket park funding in the market and amongst councillors. So and in terms of the market, we mean investors, and then in terms of councillors, we are talking about the political buying. So one of the first few aspects that we're looking into is sort of using existing resources within Islington, existing programs that we can leverage to start creating that pipeline of pocket parks and the demonstrator projects. And therefore, one of the things that we thought that would be good to use is the community infrastructure levy, which is the SIL and Section 106, because that's going to create the opportunity to start from within to start developing those demonstrator projects while we get the business model in place to go for more external facing funding. So the second point is that there is still no return on investment for the current business model that we have developed. And this is not a new challenge, it's a challenge that's happening to many infrastructure or green infrastructure or nature projects that are looking for funding. There is still the need for creating a return on investment, and we're working on it through the project demonstrators. And the third one is obviously there's a lot of change happening at the moment in the UK as well as in Europe with the potential introduction of a green taxonomy and regulatory changes to ESG, this data disclosure for investors and community and companies, right? So that is obviously going to drive it's going to create a greater incentive for investors and companies to look into ESG potential for investing in nature projects as part of their investment and capital creation. So in terms of those findings, this led us to a set of recommendations, which we're going to get into. So the set of recommendations is kind of looking into a trajectory of change, and it's kind of looking into going from within Islington, looking into internal resources, looking into internal sources of funding, and then kind of expanding into external facing opportunities. And these three recommendations that we gave to Islington are operational from the get-go. So our first practical approach was for them to be able to implement it now. So that is with the SIL and Section 106 and other similar grants to be developing a pocket parks within Islington locations. The other one is through social value procurement. So every time that they go and procure services from a company or an external organization, there is an opportunity that some of that contract could include the opportunity for them to invest in the pocket parks that Islington is trying to develop across the borough. And then the last one is to do with ESG reporting. So it's essentially covering that change through the UK green economy tax incentives and similar approaches that are going to be led through changes in policy that is going to open up the market for investors and companies to look into nature investment, and therefore going all the way to regional opportunities. So obviously we've been talking about Islington, but the main thing is that these can all be replicated across London. So with that, I'll give the word to Charlotte, who's going to do the conclusions of our research and development study as part of the NERF. Charlotte, you're on mute.
Thank you, Millie. So carrying on from Millie's presentation, having this operational from the get-go was really important, and seeking to utilize skills, expertise and knowledge across different departments in the council was also really important, because in terms of embedding a pipeline of project idea, it's multiple departments that are critical in the delivery of this. And so we very much about embedding the idea. In terms of the nature positive projects and biggest challenges to private and public sector investment, what we're really looking for is a blended finance approach. And we know that, for example, if we reduce the water into the kind of existing drainage system, then that could be a potential revenue incentive for a water board, because it's going to be, it's less pressure on the system. So there are lots of different ways that this could be played out going forward in terms of looking at those sort of potential return on investment type structures. And there's so many opportunities, whether it's the BNG, looking at this as a sort of small site offset, and lots of opportunities, the social value impact investment through the procurement, really important, because this can be used to address the revenue need. And a lot of local authorities are putting 20% on that aspect. So this is very much about, it could just be like 10%, and the remaining 10% could be competitive. So there's a lot to talk about, so maybe we'll just take it straight to the questions, but very much about building up an evidence base and incrementally making that change. I think one last point before I hand back to you, Pete, is that a couple of weeks ago, because we're doing a lot of research with investors, a couple of weeks ago I met with a potential funder and from the private sector, who in principle would like to fund 10 pocket parks in Islington for 1.5 million.